All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our fourth Career Spotlight webinar. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Shirley Qiu. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the co-directors of AAJA Women Non-Binary Voices. Today, we are very lucky to be talking to Laurel Chor, who is joining us from Hong Kong. Laurel, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My pronouns are also she, her. I'm a journalist and photographer based in Hong Kong. I write and I used to produce videos, but nowadays I'm mostly focusing on photography. And in the last few months, I've almost exclusively been covering the Hong Kong protests. And I've taken a little break the last couple of weeks, but I've been covering it more or less continuously since the very beginning.
Wow. So just to remind everyone, we'll start with the interview portion, and then we'll leave time at the very end for a Q&A from the audience. So if you have questions, please post them in the Facebook event or tweet with the hashtag AAJA Hangout. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. Could you tell us about your career path?
Yeah, so in college, I didn't study university. I studied international health and development. Um, and I thought I'd work in an NGO or something like that. But then towards the end of my college career, I realized I actually wanted to work with animals because that's what I want to do from a young age. So after graduation, I worked briefly at National Geographic Television as a fact checker just for the summer. And then I went to Africa to work with gorillas. And then I realized that wasn't for me either. And I sort of eventually realized the common thread throughout my interest for both public health and wildlife conservation was the fact that I liked talking about it and taking photos and writing. Um, so I started taking, I was blogging a lot and I started taking photos, more and more photos. I eventually landed an internship at a magazine at Time Out in Hong Kong, and that led to a job with an online media company called Coconuts. And they do city specific blogs all around Southeast Asia, and it's local news and it has a bit of an attitude. It's funny. So it was a lot of fun. I did that for 2 years. I was the associate editor and then the managing editor for Coconuts Hong Kong. And that really taught me to write very quickly, to write about a variety of topics. I was covering the Occupy protests at the time, but also writing like restaurant reviews. And what I really loved about the job was that it gave me the freedom to do all sorts of storytelling. So I was doing, just writing straight news, but also taking photos and doing photo essays. And I started producing and hosting videos as well. So I got to do a bit of everything, which was, a treat when you're just starting out. And that's how I really cut my teeth, especially during Occupy. And then I did that for 2 years. And then I got a job at Vice. So I was a producer for Vice News Tonight on HBO, which as of very recently isn't on the air anymore, at least not on HBO. So that was a fantastic job. I was the only person based in Asia. So for 2 years, I was traveling a lot, covering all sorts of stories around Asia. Doing hard news. I covered earthquakes. I covered the quake tsunami in Indonesia last year, and I covered the Rohingya refugee crisis. So there's a lot of news, but also feature kind of stories. Did a story about a boy band in China that was actually made up of all girls. And then probably one of my favorite things that I did while I was there was a documentary. The longest thing I did, it was about 25 minutes, a documentary about the migration. Well, as a migrant worker couple in China, and we followed them from where they worked in Shenzhen all the way to their home village in Sichuan for Chinese New Year. So that was a huge endeavor, and I'm really proud of the final result. And that won an Overseas Press Club award, which is really cool. Um, and then now I'm freelance. I've been freelance for just under a year now. And I just kind of wanted to do my own thing and be able to take more photos. And because I have such different interests and different mediums that I like to do, it's nice to have that flexibility. And with the protests, there's been a lot of opportunities to work for different media companies, whether as a producer or as a writer, or more often now as a photographer.
That's awesome. So, when did you start covering the Hong Kong protests?
So I started covering this year's protests on, I guess, the day of the first big march. I think that was June 9th. So that was the million person march, according to organizers. And that was something I'd never seen before. And that was just, I'd never seen so many people in my life. And I was there for that. And I actually left almost immediately after that for a conference. And then the first rounds of tear gas were fired while I was away. And I kind of panicked. I'm from Hong Kong, so seeing that happen was really scary. And I really felt like I had to be there. And I just couldn't focus on the conference while this was happening back home. So I actually rushed back home, left early, and then I was back in time for the second big march, which organizers say had 2 million people. So I've been covering since then. I haven't been there for everything. It's almost impossible. It's been more than 4 months now. Or maybe close. Yeah. So it's everyone has to take breaks, and I've been lucky to be able to take a few different breaks. And I think at the beginning there was a lot of anxiety that you would miss something, or this would be, the climax of the protest, and you always wanted to be there. But I think now that it's clear the protests are gonna keep going for a long time, I feel less anxiety about being away and taking a break, because I know the protests will still be there when I go back.
Mm-hmm. So, when you initially started covering the protests, were you approached to cover it or did you have to send out pitches?
At the beginning, it's sort of at the beginning I was trying to do more photography, so I was sending out a lot of pitches. Um, I was doing stuff for Vice since I, had connections there, so I was doing a bit of video and writing for and taking photos for their website. And then the beginning was hard because I still was figuring out, I guess, I was still sort of fresh as a freelancer and still figuring out how to do it really. And for me, the model as a freelancer was always pitching photo essays, and then writing them, reporting them, and writing them and photographing them. Whereas there isn't actually much demand for that in media. I discovered, it's hard to make it just doing that. So at the beginning, I was sending out a lot of pitches and not necessarily getting a lot of response. And then people started approaching me asking to be a stringer, a reporter. Thankfully, having been a journalist in Hong Kong for 5 years, I do have a good network here, and it is a pretty small community at the end of it, even though there are a lot of journalists here. People started asking me to string. I started doing that because there's not many freelancers in general, and there's definitely not many freelancers at all who speak Cantonese, and I do. And then I started getting more photo work. I think, especially with the protests being on weekends, people were figuring out how to cover it, I think, because obviously normally you don't work as much on the weekends, or you don't have as many people on staff on weekends. So I came in increasingly to cover on weekends, started working with the wires when it came to photos. So now I've been doing mostly photography for the wires. Occasionally I'll do other things. I'll do live spots for TV, which I've found is like a pretty good revenue stream because it'll take like 10, 15 minutes of your time and they'll pay you like 100 or $200. So that's another revenue stream as a freelancer, though I think, you know, it's Hong Kong's special in that it captivated the world's attention, well, to varying degrees, of course, but this is a huge ongoing news story, and I think it's unusual that there's so much attention and so many media companies on the ground, all scrambling to cover it, and that created a lot of opportunity in different mediums, whether it's video or reporting or doing these live TV spots or taking photos. I've been lucky to be able to pick and choose essentially what I want to do, and it's helped me learn a whole lot of different skills.
So, could you talk through what you would typically do during a protest weekend?
Now that I'm mostly taking photos, so oftentimes the protest might start Friday night, but on any given day, yeah, usually the big days are Saturday and Sunday. And so I get ready in the morning, usually have a big breakfast. So there's a lot of gear involved. And I'm an over preparer. So like my bag's especially large and heavy, but I carry a camelback water bladder, so I fill that up. You always want snacks because you'll be on your feet all day. Like I'm usually walking, 20, 30,000 steps a day. You'll want, and as a photographer, I'm carrying different lenses, and if I'm filing for a wire, I'll have my laptop. So a lot of, and then your press vest, your gas mask, your helmet, and things like a towel in case you get water cannoned these days, or saline solution, or stuff like that. So make sure I have all my gear. Press pass, that's becoming increasingly important too. And then I'll head out. And so just usually there's a march, and you go to the beginning and you march with them to the end, and it kind of disperses. Now increasingly so, wire agencies will have a car because the protests are often in different places, and it's quite hard. No one can cover this on their own. You have to be in a team, and ideally you have someone telling you where to go, because on the ground you actually see such a small part of the protest. Like really the best way to see the protest is sitting at home and having like 8 live streams up at the same time, so you can monitor different sites and see what's happening. And things change so quickly. I mean, the protesters' motto is "Be water," or one of their mottos. So they pop up in places all of a sudden and then disperse. So it is a challenge to cover things, and you do miss things a lot, which is frustrating. And you're constantly running around, arriving too late to things, and a lot of times just luck or instinct. I rely a lot on Twitter to figure out where to go, or there's a big WhatsApp group of journalists that I've started. That's helpful because everyone can kind of chirp in and say what they see where they are. So throughout the day, and then I'm also trying to tweet. I think it's just it's nice to keep people informed while on the ground when you have like a spare minute to tweet. And I found also tweeting throughout the protests has allowed me to grow, a minor Twitter following. And that also brings in opportunities. That's often how TV channels find me and realize that I'm on the ground, and see that I'm legitimate, and that's how they contact me. You get Twitter DMs asking, like, can you be on TV in 20 minutes? Which I can't always do, but so yeah, you're kind of just trying to figure out where to go, and then I'll be taking photos, and then every few hours I'll be filing photos, which is usually like from the street or like a cafe or a restaurant if you can find somewhere that's open.
So you mentioned some gear that you carry with you for safety. Do you have any safety tips for people who have never maybe covered a protest before?
Yeah, I mean, my experience is definitely very Hong Kong specific, and even though there is an increasing amount of violence in the protests, it's still ultimately like a fairly safe environment, if you will, from what I can gather compared to other protests. No one's died. Um, and and live shots have been fired at people only twice so far. I mean, it's a shame that, you know, we have to use global standards to compare that kind of thing because, at the end of the day, it's all scary and awful. But compared to other places, I think, no one's really wearing flak yet, for example. But in Hong Kong specifically, you definitely need the right gear. You definitely want a helmet, and you definitely want a proper helmet that covers you well. People usually recommend a rock climbing helmet because that's designed to take objects hitting your head. Many other helmets are designed to protect your head when you fall to the ground. But the Hong Kong protests, what you really want to be protected from is things falling or being thrown at your head. You want a good gas mask. I think by now almost everyone is wearing a full gas mask, but for a long time, most people didn't, and that doesn't work. I mean, yes, you'll be able to breathe, but if you're blinded by tear gas or pepper spray, it's very, very painful, and you're totally incapacitated and at the mercy of the people around you if you get tear gassed or pepper sprayed. So you want a proper full face mask. The press vest is important just for visibility, and with the police getting really aggressive, you want to be clearly marked as press. I mean, even the police are they have been accusing people of being like fake journalists. So you want to be clearly demarcated and have your press pass, which really is just, there is no official press pass in Hong Kong. So it's just any form of ID that identifies you as a journalist. So for me, I think the safety points are just, situational awareness, be very aware of where you're standing. As a photographer, I have to be the front lines, but generally it is safer to be on the side of the police because they're the ones firing things, the weapons. And yeah, I mean, it's everything I've sort of learned on the job. So I don't know if it's like proper safety advice, but yeah, you just have to be very aware of whether you're in the line of fire. It's, one thing for the police to actually aim at journalists, which happens all the time. But another to just be in the line of fire in between the police and the protesters. So you want to avoid that. And the protesters do throw things. They throw bricks, they throw Molotov cocktails, and you don't want to be in the line of fire for that too. So there are things flying overhead or very close to you. So you just have to be very aware. And you do see people, I have seen journalists like get shot with rubber bullets. We had the case where an Indonesian journalist lost sight in one eye because the police in that situation was very clearly shooting at journalists, or a protester had run in front of them, but there was very clearly journalists very right in front of them, in front of the police. So after that happened, everyone's been sort of escalating their gear. And I think that's what's interesting is that, everyone has sort of escalated the level of their gear gradually. And now I'm at a point, I just came back from the US, from a trip to the US, and I picked up ballistic goggles. I'm probably gonna get a ballistic helmet because there's no point in getting ballistic goggles if your helmet's not ballistic. So it's gradual escalation from just, the beginning it's just like goggles, just a mouth mask, and if that, and then now it's a full face mask, and you're thinking of ballistic protection as the police get more violent and as more shots were fired. So everyone's sort of playing catch up, but at the same time, I guess it's like an insidious, gradual increase in the levels of violence, and so it's almost happened in a way that you didn't notice you were escalating.
So you mentioned it's been over 4 months now of protests in Hong Kong. Do you and your colleagues, fellow journalists in Hong Kong, feel the mental impact of covering this movement?
I think we all do. Some people, I honestly don't know how they've been doing it. Like I've taken breaks. It also depends on, I think everyone needs to know their level of exposure they're able to have. You know, it's already, no matter what, you're going to be working long hours, but some people, they'll take, especially, you know, if you're on a smaller team, you'll cycle who's out in the field. You'll have someone in the office like monitoring and writing, and so they'll cycle those roles, which I think is important to give people rest. Yeah, I think people are tired, really, really tired. And I think what's also unique about the Hong Kong protest is that many, the majority of journalists covering it live in Hong Kong, because this is a hub. A lot of networks and newspapers have actual bureaus here, or they have staff based here. So I think it's mentally taxing when it's happening to your home, whether you're from here or not. And I think also the fact that it's on the weekends, like you really just don't really see your friends anymore. So you don't really get all that important work-life balance. Yeah, I think it is taxing, and especially dealing with the police. I've noticed I've probably become a more aggressive person in certain situations from having to deal with the police. So I think you kind of don't realize the low grade stress you're constantly under, and of course the stress of being tear gassed and water cannon, and the pain, and it's very physically taxing. Like you're on your feet, often running for like 10-12 hours a day. So it's emotionally and physically taxing, and you do have to make sure you get breaks. And the last time I left Hong Kong for a trip, I was actually really looking forward to it because I knew I needed it.
If you're just joining our webinar now, just a reminder to post your questions for Laurel either on Twitter with the hashtag AAJA Hangout, or in our Facebook group, or you could just post it in the chat in the Zoom chat here. So we'll go over reader Q&A at the very end, but just wanted to shout that out again. So how is your reporting being received by your friends and your family and people on the internet?
I think, I was never very much a Twitter person. But through the protests, Twitter has become such an important tool to figure out what's going on. And people are often tweeting from the field. So you can sort of see what's happening where. And so I made a list of journalists or people to follow to see what's going on the ground. And that list grew really popular. I think it has over 1,000 followers now. So Twitter's been really important to journalists, and I think it's also brought a lot of non-journalists to Twitter. I was surprised to see like some of my friends referring to my Twitter when I know they don't normally tweet. So that has helped me like grow a lot of followers on Twitter. And then on Instagram, it also brought me a lot of followers since I'm posting photos. Just to give an idea, like on Twitter, like I really wasn't tweeting much, and I really was a nobody on Instagram. I still am, but I have like 20,000 followers on Twitter, and I probably had like 3,000 before. And with Instagram, I think I'm like at like 13,000, and I probably had like 4,000 before, something like that. So it's audience grew very quickly because there's so much interest in keeping up with what's going on in Hong Kong, which is surprising to me, but great. And I think Hong Kong's lucky in that people actually know about Hong Kong and care for whatever reason, even though there's so much going on in the world, of course. So it's, yeah, I think it's been cool to have this direct line to an audience. And it also means, on certain days I don't get work. But it's still, I know a lot of freelancers do this, that you don't always have work, but it's still worth your while to go out there and report, because you can report straight to Twitter, and that's still valuable, and that still gets you work down the line. Um, so for me, it's cool having an audience. And another thing I did that was different was I did Instagram story takeovers for Vice. And I really enjoyed that because it was, super easy to do, and like filming an actual video where you're running around with the crew. Here, just me and my phone, and I was actually often taking photos at the time, and I'm just pulling out my phone at random moments, especially when nothing's happening. Um, and I just like tell them what's going on or show them what it looks like, through a very casual Instagram story format. And Vice News almost has 1 million followers on Instagram, so I was reaching a pretty big audience very quickly with no editor, no filter really. So that was and I got a really good response from that. I think people found it, people felt like they were there with me, which is what Instagram stories feel like in any situation, right? So I got a lot of good response from that. People felt like it was really engaging, and that it felt intimate, which I think it was nice to discover a new way of doing the news, basically. So yeah, I think it's overwhelming a little bit to suddenly have an audience that I didn't before, but it is empowering. It does bring you more work, and it's cool to just have your own platform to talk directly to your own audience. But that said, like, it also brings a lot of trolls, obviously. And I had to speak to Instagram at one point because the trolls on my Instagram account got really bad. So double-edged sword, as with anything with the internet, really.
Right. So on a similar note, how has being a woman impacted the way you're able to do your work, both as you're covering these protests and maybe in the past?
I think online, as has been very well documented for any woman on the internet, the vitriol is definitely just worse. Um, I think just saying something as a woman is like more aggravating to the internet than if you were just saying it as, someone who's perceived to not be a woman. So you definitely get a lot more trolls, and a lot of it's a lot more gendered. And you get a lot of people trying to like essentially undermine your credibility. Like, I remember like these trolls like having a back and forth on one of my tweets being like, she's just some happy-go-lucky girl who's, tweeting mainstream opinion to get more followers. And like no man would ever get trolling like that, right? Or they're trying to paint you as like some dumb chick. So that kind of thing, or you get a lot more creepy things. There's this one guy that's got a lot of attention because it affected so many of us. But this one Twitter user went out of his way and made a collage of all the ethnically Chinese women journalists covering the protests. And it was like, he like tweeted, he was like, I spend my lunch hour doing this, please retweet. And it was like a 60 women collage. Like, he took all of our Twitter profile pictures and made them into a grid. And it was like, I knew almost all of them. It was like all of the ethnically Chinese or Asian women who were covering this. So that was obviously gendered and racial. And he's basically saying we're like race traders, which is super patriarchal and sexist. So yeah, that kind of thing. And then, so yeah, online the vitriol is just definitely gendered and worse if you're a woman. And then at the protests, I do think, the police are basically bullies, and women are going to be easier targets than men. So it took me a while to realize that I was probably getting manhandled way worse than the guys. Because, there were a couple of times when I like tweeted something, not specifically because I was manhandled, but um, maybe because I like had footage, like had my phone out, so like I had something to tweet, or like there's one time I was almost tweeting something because it was funny, because like a police officer had shoved me and then told me not to push him when I had my camera to my face and I didn't even know he was there. So, and then both times I would get a lot of private messages from other journalists covering the protests being like, "Are you okay?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Like, does this not happen to you all the time?" Like, I was surprised they were treating it as an anomaly. And that's when I first started realizing that like I probably get pushed around more than the men do. And of course, like if you're like a white guy, I think you probably get the least abuse. But as a local woman, I think I get screamed at more and definitely manhandled. Like there's been a couple times when I've been grabbed from behind by my backpack and just like yanked by a police officer, like a child. And I don't think that would happen if I were like a 6 foot dude. So yeah, it's probably harder being a woman covering it, but um, yeah, that's just reality of being a journalist in most places, I think.
So, you've covered this, and you've also covered other stories in the past that seem to be mentally and emotionally taxing work. High stress situations like the Rohingya refugee crisis and the earthquake that you mentioned in Indonesia. What draws you to these stories?
Uh, I think, I mean, as a journalist, of course, like I think I'm just motivated by using whatever platform I have to tell the audience I'm able to reach about what's happening. I think, yeah, I think I just simply want to tell these stories, and I think especially when you're working for an organization, and when I was covering those two stories, I was working for Vice, and I think, and we had a show on HBO. So it's like we have this platform, this amazing platform, and we have the resources to do really good stuff. Um, and you kind of want to make the case, like if we have this platform and we're creating a show, and when we sort of decide what news our viewers consume, like you make the case like we should be covering this. And especially as the only person in Asia for Vice News, I had to fight a lot of time, especially in the Trump era, for a show that's on HBO USA. Like, you really had to fight to get other stories on the air. Um, and Asia is not necessarily a priority, especially if it's not like Japan and China, essentially. So, I think for me, I felt as like an Asian person based in Asia and as the sole person for this organization at the time, I felt like, I had a responsibility to push to get certain stories in the agenda, and you feel responsibility to your viewers to cover these stories that are important, but that are not necessarily well understood by your colleagues in New York, for example. And of course, I don't understand their patches either. But so I think, yeah, I think you just want people to know about things you think are important, and you want to use the audience you have.
Are you able to leave work at work, so to speak? And what do you do to unwind?
Um, I think with the protests in Hong Kong, it's hard because I am from here, and it's so rapidly evolving that if you kind of let your guard down for a hot second, you miss a lot, and that it's just harder to catch up later. And I'm kind of at a point right now because I just was gone for a couple of weeks. But I think it's also hard because being from here and living here, when you do see your friends, that's all they want to talk about, and that's all what anyone wants to talk about when they find out you're from Hong Kong or that you're a journalist. So I think that's tough, but at the same time, I'm happy to talk about these things. So I think it is hard, especially in the social media age, to switch off. But I think I'm probably able to do that for the most part. I guess my strategy is just to leave Hong Kong entirely when I need a break, which I don't know if that's necessarily healthy to like have to go to this extreme. But a lot of people have to take holidays, of course. Like we all need breaks. So and yeah, how I unwind. A certain point in the protests, I realize, I take a long time to unwind when I get home. First of all, you have to like finish filing, and then you shower because you're disgusting, and you like still smell like tear gas, and you eat because you haven't eaten all day, and then by then it's already really late. And yeah, it takes a long time to unwind. I think there's a lot of adrenaline still going through your body, and at some point in the protest, especially once we had like a big WhatsApp group, I realized, if someone sent something at like 4 a.m., like a whole bunch of people would respond. Like a lot of us, I think, are in the same boat where we're like sleeping really odd hours because of the nature of the protests, and because we take a long time to switch off. So for me, it's really important to exercise, especially as a photographer and carrying all that gear. I think it's the only way I'm able to do it to stay fit. So now when I work out, there's that additional motivation. Like this is the difference between, being extremely exhausted all day or not, and also being able to carry your gear all day and be able to run to things or away from things. So that adds a layer of motivation to exercise, but also to unwind. It's important. I do try to carve out time for friends and my dog. So the normal self-care things, and at least for the protests, it's mostly concentrated on the weekend. So at least you still have the rest of the week to sort of recoup.
So I have some other questions, but I want to be mindful of your time because we are scheduled to go until 9:45. So I'll just ask one more question, and then we'll have time for a couple audience questions. My last question is, what do you have to say to aspiring visual journalists who are looking to cover similar types of stories?
I think the advice I usually give is don't forget that, especially in this day and age, like you don't need permission to go and cover these things and take photos. Like, of course, like be careful, but if there's a news story, especially in your own backyard, you should be covering it, or you should go be doing stories regardless of whether you have a publication who's willing to publish it. Like you can always self-publish. So I think for any journalist, really, like if you want to be, or any creative field, like if you want to be a writer or an artist or a photographer or video producer or filmmaker, like you should just be doing the act of doing, and not wait for the permission or from a perceived authority to do it.
That's great advice. Okay, so we'll go to a couple audience questions. Paul is asking, what do you think about the impact of masks? Is that all about demonstrators being identified and used against them?
Yes, so there was the ban on masks implemented a few weeks ago. It's just essentially another excuse to be more violent from the police, I think. The chief executive seemed to genuinely think that it would be a deterrent. Of course, it was not. It just made people angrier, and it brought more people to the streets, peacefully and not peacefully. But everyone still wears masks, journalists included, and there have been a lot of concerns that the police would not let journalists wear them, and that we would also be in violation of the law. But you have to wear a mask to deal with the tear gas, and it certainly hasn't stopped the protesters. So it's probably just made things worse for everyone, because it's just given the police more excuses to be violent, and it's just created more legal concern that if you're wearing a mask, especially as a journalist, that you might still get arrested for it.
Okay. And the second question from Justin is, when photographing, how do you decide what to cover considering how big the protests are?
So there's a combination for me is of three things. Twitter. I made a Twitter list and I refer to that list, and it's usually, everyone who's on the ground was tweeting about it, and you can see what they're seeing where they are. Or sometimes it's actually people, journalists tweeting from behind a screen if they're sitting at home or in the office and they are watching live streams. And they can sort of tweet what's going on in those live streams, and they can sort of have like the bird's eye view of what's going on. So there's Twitter, and then there's Telegram groups. I personally find them to be not that helpful just because there's so much noise and so many of them that you basically have to go through each one and like scroll to the bottom, and it's not all that helpful. Oh, there's an app. I'm actually not sure if it's the same one that was pulled by Apple. I think it was actually. There's like a live map that someone created with like different icons for like different types of police and where they are, and like the water cannon trucks. That can be helpful. The live stream is really helpful. So different media are just streaming from their phones generally, and they're usually in different places. So you can tune in to see like what they see and determine whether it's worth it to go there. There's a big WhatsApp group for journalists, and everyone can sort of chime in as to where they see things. And then hopefully, if for example, I'm working for a wire that day, there'll be that organization's WhatsApp group, and, they're communicating there too. So it's like constant communication. You can't cover everything on your own. And that's why so many people, especially photographers, are covering it at the same time just to like split up territory. But even then, that doesn't guarantee you'll be in the right place at the right time. So it's a lot of luck, a lot of instinct, a lot of running around, a lot of jumping into taxis, especially now that the MTR system is increasingly shut down during the protests. So it's a lot of running around and a lot of being too late.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Laurel, for your time. This has been a really interesting webinar. And thank you, everyone who tuned in and for your questions. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. And you can always reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram, and if you have more questions.
Okay, great.
All
right.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.